Hi, I'm Ethan from the ACLU of Oregon, where we and a coalition of other organizations are supporting Senate Bill 1098 in the Oregon State Legislature, which would prevent discriminatory book bans in school districts across Oregon. To celebrate the freedom to read, some folks today are going to be doing readings from a book that has been banned across this country. That's Alice Faye Duncans' Memphis, Martin, and the Mountaintop, an amazing book about the sanitation strike of 1968. So please enjoy some excerpts from that book, as well as some comments directly from the author, Alice Faye Duncan, and look in the comments for ways to support Senate Bill 1098 in the Oregon Legislature. Thanks so much.
I'm Dr. Mayfield, and I will be reading an insert on Memphis, Martin, and the Mountaintop. This story was mined from history books and the memories of a Memphis teacher. When she was a child, she marched in the Memphis sanitation strike with her mother and father. Men, women, and children contributed to the strike in 1968. Whole families sacrificed their comforts. They suffered for the cause. However, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. paid the highest cost. He gave his life to the struggle for freedom and justice.
I'm Tyshana Carpenter from Don't Shoot Portland. Thank you for joining us for Spring Breakout. I'm going to continue reading Martin, Memphis, and the Mountaintop by Alice Faye Duncans. The Memphis struggle was an economic fight. Better wages and pay were a matter of civil rights. Poverty was a civil war. My daddy and his friends were the working poor. The men sought better wages to feed their families and buy decent homes, not run-down shanties like our rented house. As public servants, sanitation workers deserved better pay to educate their children and give them a future, bright with hope. This was the message Dr. King preached when he arrived in Memphis on March 18th. He said, "All labor has dignity." Dr. King's voice was loud and stirring. I listened with my parents from a crowded church pew as the famous leader drafted a plan to march in Memphis with the striking men. Dr. King set a date for March 22nd. Daddy leaned towards Mama's ear. He said, "We need everybody to march that day." Mama did not waver. She assured Daddy, "I'll take off work, you can count on me." Then Mama patted my hand and said, "We will take Lorraine. She can march with us."
Hi, I'm Ethan from the ACLU of Oregon. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from Alice Faye Duncan's banned book, Memphis, Martin, and the Mountaintop, that illustrates how governments have always organized against free speech and political protest. Trucks and tanks. Mayor Loeb issued a state of emergency in response to the Beale Street riot. He imposed a 7 p.m. curfew and called 4,000 National Guard soldiers to patrol the Memphis streets in military trucks and tanks. The presence of soldiers restored the peace, but on the following day the strike seemed to have no end. Mayor Loeb held firmly to his anti-union position and workers continued to march. The sight of loaded guns did not send them back to work. From my bedroom window, I saw soldiers in big green tanks creep slowly up the street. I waved to my friend Jan, who sat in her window too. Nobody played outside that day. Fear locked us in our houses.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Mountaintop. Dream big.
Walk tall.
Be strong.
March on.
Don't quit.
Never stop.
Climb up the mountaintop.
I'm sorry. I came in.
Thank you, Ms. Rayford, for inviting me to be a part of your program this week during the spring breakout. It is my plum-pleasing pleasure to speak with you. Now, to your question about book banning, how it affects my work as a writer, and what we can do. I say that book banning has affected my work because I am writing for children and my subject area is Black history. And a great majority of these books that are being banned relate to Black history. So I can say, like, between 2016 and 2022, I sold over 10 picture book manuscripts about Black history from 2022 until the present moment. I have not sold any picture book manuscripts. There are none that I have under contract that I have gotten those contracts between 2022 and 2025. And the only difference between 2022 and 2025 compared to when I was selling just a great number of manuscripts is this surge of book bans on Black history or African American history here in America. So, yes, the book ban movement has hurt the bottom line for a multitude of writers, particularly Black. Excuse me. The ban movement has hurt the bottom line for a number of writers, specifically those who come from minority communities, as we are sharing about minority histories. However, that has not stopped me from writing about African American history. I am still researching. I am still writing. I am still making an attempt to sell these manuscripts. And I do believe possibly what might happen in this present age is what also happened during the Black arts movement in like the early 70s, when a lot of Black folks that were writing about Black history, they ended up self-publishing their work themselves or independently publishing their work beyond major publishing companies. So I remember Gwendolyn Brooks was one of those writers in the 70s who she specifically uh, went and published published books independently, and she worked with Third World Press, which was a Black publisher. So maybe this new day, this new age, it might begin a renaissance of Black and brown people perhaps starting their own publishing companies. I cannot say, I do not know, but I do know that the book ban movement has hurt the bottom line for a multitude and many not publishers, but the bottom line for a multitude and many writers.
I'm sorry. I wanted to ask you, what are the publishers? Because I'm thinking to myself that you're a very successful author.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, are the publishers not fighting for the authors that have been, creating an opportunity for them to sell books? What's happening with that kind of advocacy? And I'm very excited and interested in self-publishing and having Black organizations step up and create those spaces and those businesses um, for the future. Because I think, as somebody that's seeing how everything is playing out now, I
Mhm.
think that we should have had our own anyway, because we know how destabilized America has been in regards to Black entrepreneurship and stabilization of our businesses and our stories. But what are the publishers doing? What is their response? Because you would think that you built up a lot of credit and relationship with them.
Well,
Are
well,
they afraid
well,
or just being defunded?
I have been very well supported. I have been very well supported by all of my publishers. Um, it it is just that the bottom line, you have to consider the bottom line, right? And so I've been supported very well. I have editors that still want to read my work, but it's just that when you go before, publishing doesn't happen with just one editor uh wanting your work. What has to happen is those those editors take your work to a publishing board or editorial board, and that editorial board is going to have somebody in marketing, somebody in publicity, somebody that is in the editorial department, somebody in the art department, and the first thing that they're looking at is the bottom line. And so for me, again, I'm still writing and I'm still researching the books about Black history. Yep, that is what I'm doing. But you, you there is like when they look at the bottom line and they say, well, this might not be a good time for that. This might not be a good time for this. Or because there has been, prior to the book banning, there had been a great deluge compared to the past of titles about Black history, titles about minority histories, right? You know, they might be saying a lot of things like, well, we already have a book on that. We already have a book on this. I happen to be writing about Martin Luther King all of the time. I have a book, Memphis, Martin, and Mountaintop. I have a book, Coretta's Journey. I have a book that will be released in 2026 that is about King. I'm now researching and writing another book about Dr. King's life. That book has not gone before publishers yet, but that's what I'm working on now. And so I hope that when my book, it'll actually be my fourth book about Dr. King, when that book is ready to go before editorial board, I do hope that people will be favorable toward it. We'll see.
Well, I hope so too. Dr. King is one of my heroes. My dad shares his birthday, and when I first started our Reclaim MLK March, I did it in honor of my dad with a birthday cake at our family-owned restaurant, which was, a space where there was a lot of civil rights issues that were happening. And he was like, "What are you doing this for?" And I said, "Because I'm running for office now." I was like, "You've always inspired me." And I think that that inspiration of people like Dr. King, again, in our history, having context, being able to see them at different periods in their life, being able to see the growth of who they are as people. When I read the Coretta Scott King book, like learning the differences besides just the "I have a dream" speech, learning the humanity behind the efforts. That's the kind of thing that engineers the growth of people, especially children and their elders too, when they're reading them. It reminds them to have these conversations and to kind of mirror those actions for ourselves. Because when we're sitting and we don't know who we are and where we came from and what efforts were made on behalf of us, there's this tendency to feel hopeless. And I think that when we provide these books to the children and their families, we've seen that turn around, and intentionally, like the brightness of the children when they receive a brand new book written by somebody that recognizes them. They don't even have to know who you are, but when they're touching the items that you're publishing, these books with these beautiful illustrations and these words, it is familiar to them, and they kind of see that they have been centered for this effort. And so, I understand why they're trying to ban it, because we're moving back to a different time, politically. But I'm very excited about the effort, and I'm hoping that as a full community of Black people that have made strides based on the efforts of our elders and our ancestors, that we start building the investment moving forward and not depend so much on the ranks of the government and all these different agencies. Like, we have the ability to become what we need, to make these type of published materials sustainable for future generations. We honor every book that you put out because it does honor our history in a way that we haven't seen it. When I read books about the past, it's so much disadvantage, and it visibly and sometimes even audibly tells you that the Black people didn't have the courage, or they didn't have the strength, or they just didn't know or understand politics enough to overcome the violence of white supremacy. But when I read your books, it's actual evidence of what that struggle looked like from the people that were being harmed by the oppression and the discrimination. So just thank you again. I can't tell you how much we honor you and talk about you here. Hopefully we'll have you out here doing bigger and better things soon. But I'm ready for presentation time if you're ready.
I I am ready. I'm ready for the presentation as well. But I want to say, to add to your point, that when it comes to book banning, nobody can ban what you're teaching your child in your home. Nobody, like, they took prayer out of the schools, but they didn't take prayer out of homes. And just because they weren't praying in the school anymore did not mean that a child was not having uh, their spiritual life uh, developed, right? And so, because you had the home that was doing its part to develop the spiritual life. And so that's my opinion about book banning. You can you can attempt to book ban, or you can attempt to ban all of the books you like, but as Mama Lena in Raising in the Sun said, but as for me and my house, right? As for me and my house, we're going to read books, and we're going to read books, not just books about African American history, but we're going to read books about a multitude of cultures that maybe do not reflect our African American history, because that is how you create children that have empathy, and that is how you create children who have an appreciation for the positivity that all cultures bring here to America. So, on that note, yes, I am ready to begin my presentation. And so, what I want to say is that literacy is liberty. Literacy is liberation. And the way to stay free and the way to be free is to read books. And so that's what we want to talk about just for a few minutes. I am Alice Faye Duncan. I'm a writer. I am a national board school teacher. I taught 30 years in the city of Memphis. And when I retired, I then devoted my time, and now devote my time full time, to researching, writing books, and speaking to children all over this nation about the power of being a well read student and a well read citizen. So, say it with me: literacy is liberty. Thank you. Now, as I shared earlier, I do a lot of research about Dr. King because I live in Memphis. Memphis is the place where Dr. King was assassinated. I was born in 1967. Therefore, when I was in elementary school, Dr. King's assassination in Memphis was still very fresh. It was fresh on the hearts of my teachers. It was fresh on the hearts of the people in my Black community. It was fresh on the hearts of the members of my AME church that I attended, St. James AME Church. It was fresh. His assassination was fresh in the hearts of my parents. And so, therefore, everyone was talking about King, his um, his contributions to America, not just for Black people, but his contributions that he was trying to make when he died, which was in 1968 during the Memphis sanitation strike. And so he's always been important to me. And what he had to say has always been important to me. And what Coretta had to say, it has become important to me, because the more I've gotten to know Dr. King, the more I've gotten to know Coretta. So I say here, what the king said. What did they say? Dr. King said this. He said, "For when people get caught up with that which is right, and they are willing to sacrifice for it, there is no stopping point short of victory." Once we become willing to sacrifice, to make whatever sacrifices we have to make, so that liberation will thrive and democracy will live, then there will be no stopping us. Okay. And then I want to say this in terms of what Coretta Scott King said. Coretta Scott King said, she said, struggle is a never ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. You Let me say that again. Coretta Scott King said, let me say that again. Coretta Scott King said, struggle is a never ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation, which means what we're experiencing now in America is the freedom struggle that is now on the shoulders of young people. It is a fight that they will have to participate in. If they are fighting in the way that Dr. King did, it will be through civil disobedience. It will be nonviolently, right? But the reality is that freedom is never truly achieved because the powerful are never going to concede their power, just lay down and concede it. So it's always freedom is always a fight, and in every generation there is always a movement to overcome, right? And so with that, I want all people, the adults and the children, to understand that you can expect a fight because freedom is a continuous struggle. No books, no freedom. This is the goal of the book ban movement. They don't want you to have books because they don't want you to have books because they don't want you to be liberated in your mind. They don't wish for you to be a critical thinker because if you are a critical thinker, you can then read through the propaganda and know that it is propaganda that is steeped oftentimes it is propaganda that is steeped in hatred. So you have my book, Memphis, Martin, and the Mountaintop, which in 2023, the headline in Duval County in one of the Jacksonville newspapers was MLK book never made it into Duval County classrooms, but its story is worth telling. My book is about the assassination of Dr. King and how him fighting for economic rights for every American is the thing that got him killed. So this book, my book, Memphis Martin and Mountaintop, never made it to the shelves in the school district in Duval County. And so to that I say, read banned books, because oftentimes you will find that banned books have just the information you need to make you a critical thinker. Banned books oftentimes have just the information that you need so that you will not make the mistakes of the past. What are we going to do? We will read banned books. Now, 57 years ago, here in the city of Memphis, I'm in Memphis right now. 57 years ago, this was the beginning of the Memphis sanitation strike, where Dr. King came and used it as his platform to begin the Poor People's Campaign. Because in 1968, Dr. King was going to Washington to encourage Congress and the Senate to create a federal living wage. What we learned in 68 in Memphis is that freedom is and was a family affair. It is not something that just women fight. It is not something that just men fight. It is something that a freedom movement requires men, women, and children to participate in that movement. And that's what happened in Memphis. Now, I'm not going to share the entire story with you because you can read Memphis, Martin, and Mountaintop to understand what I mean, but say it with me. Freedom is a family affair. It was, it is, and it will forever be a family affair. It requires all of us to fight, to stay free, to get free. Now, I want to encourage students to understand that in freedom movements, it might oftentimes see that there is one group that is being oppressed while the other is being free. But again, freedom not only is a family affair, but freedom requires everyone in the community, Black, brown, yellow, white, Jewish, whatever, Christian, whatever your Buddhist, Muslim, whatever your religious faith is. It requires all of us to be involved. And in 1968, it was one white man that marched on the day that it snowed in Memphis. His name was Tommy Moore, and he had a battle cry. He said, "Do right, Mr. Mayor." And so my question to you is, what is your battle cry in 2025, 57 years later? What is your battle cry? And also, like Tommy Moore, Tommy Moore stood alone that day when it snowed. It was like 16 inches of snow. He stood alone because the Black men who were marching, they were poor and they did not have adequate shoes. They did not have adequate clothes to stand and march in the snow because they were very poor. But Tommy Moore stood alone and he said, "Do right, Mr. Mayor." And so my question is, what will your battle cry be? And it should be for all of us. Do right, America. That is what our battle cry should be. And even if America does not do right, we must still be righteous in our treatment and our contact with others. My final word: possess the land. When Dr. King came to Memphis, he said in his speech, just like Moses, he said he looked over into the promised land, but he did not possess the land. And so, what Dr. King leaves you is a challenge to pursue the promise of freedom that the Constitution says we all have. Your challenge, Dr. King leaves you with this challenge, is to not just look over into the promise, not just to go to the mountaintop, look over into the promise, but your challenge is to walk into the promise and to not walk into the promise alone. If one person is not free, no one is free. So as you pursue liberation, as you pursue freedom, as you're reading books, do not walk into the promised land alone. Say it with me. Possess the land. Say it one more time. Possess the land. Because that is the legacy that you are left with. It's either freedom or it is to die in suffering. God bless you. Here's my word: be free, read books. Why? Because literacy is liberty, literacy is liberation. Fannie Lou Hamer said, "If one of us is not free, none of us is free." So, what must we do? We must move about to possess the land, make sure that we do it together. I'm Alice Faye Duncan. Thank you for listening. And thank you for this invitation to speak, Miss Rayford. Thank you so much.